Ty and Mitch here to talk about drugs and alcohol again.
Here to shed some light on drug addiction, alcoholism, and what rehab really looks like. Okay, here we go with another episode from the Retire Studio. My name is Ty Empey. It's Mitch Payne. We have a very special guest with us today, Miss Jennifer Jones. We're going to be asking her anything and everything as it relates to the topic of recovery and addiction and rehab and all that sort of stuff. So before we jump into that, Mitch, do you have anything you want to add?
Nope, just excited to have our very first guest.
Perfect. So Jen, why don't you start off with, give us like a 30-second quick introduction of your whole life.
Okay. My name is Jen Jones, not Jennifer. I was born, I did drugs, and now I'm in recovery.
Perfect. Let's dive into that a little bit. Where were you born?
I was born in Logan, Utah, but
Okay.
I grew up in Kemmer, Wyoming.
Kemmer,
It's Kemmer, but
Okay. And how long did you live there? How did you end up in Utah?
Well, I lived in Wyoming till I was 18, and then I split. Like I had to get out. It was terrible. It was great for anyone watching from Wyoming, but and then I moved to Salt Lake for a little bit, and then back to Wyoming, and then to Vegas, and then to St. George.
Gotcha.
Because I got pregnant.
Because you got pregnant.
Yeah.
And how old were you?
When I got pregnant?
Yes.
22, 23.
Nice. And at what point in your life did you start experimenting, or did you get into drugs and alcohol?
I think that the first time I drank, I was 13, probably. It was really common. My household, like we had parties at Christmas and whatever, and we were allowed to drink. I think the first time I ever smoked marijuana, I was maybe 13 or 14. And yeah, that was it the whole time.
And then, like, at what point did it, like, progress into something more than just, like, an experimental thing? Like, when did it kind of start to turn a little bit more serious?
The whole time.
The whole time?
I think I can think of one time where I drank and I didn't drink to blackout, and that was my wedding night. That's the only time I didn't drink to blackout.
How long have you been in recovery?
For 9 years. It'll be 10 years in November.
Wow, that's a long time.
That's a long time.
And tell us a little bit about what that looks like. Like, when you found it, did it take you a while to, like, tell us how you got into recovery. Did it take you a while to find something that worked, or did you kind of jump in both feet? Or tell us about your recovery journey.
I thought you meant, did it take a while to drink to blackout? I was like,
no.
Probably 2 hours. But I had periods of like where I would stop. I didn't use when I was pregnant with my kids, but I would start using something in between. And then I had a period of abstinence and then started again. And no, I went to jail several times. I said, this is it. I'm not doing this again. And then I'd use the second I got out. So it took a long time. I don't think I jumped in with both feet until this last time. And so, just jail. I got out and was in sober living. And the last time I used, I was living in sober living. So, yeah.
What was your primary drug of choice, or like, what are some of the things that you spent the most time using?
I would say alcohol was definitely my first love, and then heroin, pills, then heroin, and then meth, and then IV heroin and IV meth.
Gotcha.
And then, all the other things too.
Yeah. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but paint a picture for us. Tell us a little bit about what life was like in the darkest, deepest pits of your addiction. And you don't have to go into details or anything, but like, what was life like? What was your state of mind like? Things like that, just to kind of, because we'll contrast that, and we're going to talk more about your recovery here in a minute. But what was life like when it was at its worst?
I think there's like, in my mind, it's like a movie. I remember like certain things, and one of the times I remember, I was crying, and my husband was videoing me because I think he wanted to like Hasselhoff me. He's like, oh, look at what a mess you are. Maybe you'll get clean or whatever, but it didn't work. But I remember just crying, like, and not wanting to use, but having to use. And I left my daughter, I don't know how many times. I would go get a pack of like the old dad went to get a pack of
memes.
cigarettes.
Yeah.
Mom went to get a gallon of milk, and I wouldn't come back for like 2 weeks at a time. But just, I didn't really want to die, but I didn't really want to live. Like, I remember that very vividly, just not wanting to be here, and everything was so hard. Everything was just so hard, and I think like my biggest regrets are, I mean, I don't have a lot of regrets, but the things that I think about the most often are just leaving my daughter and leaving my husband. So, yeah.
How's your relationship with them today?
It's wonderful.
How did you get from that point where you were leaving for gallons of milk to where you're at today?
Well, I haven't gone to get a gallon of milk since, so that helped.
You're not allowed to do the groceries
Yeah.
anymore.
Hey, maybe you just stay here and I'll take your car.
Jones does all the grocery shopping in the house.
He actually really does do all the grocery shopping. I wonder if that's it. I'll have to ask him when I
You
get
need to
home.
have him on the show.
Yeah, you do. It'd be wild.
It'd be great. I want to get his side of the story.
Oh, it'd be similar, but he remembers things a little differently than I do, but they're not far off. So, but I would say like the way we got to where we are now is that I did a lot of work. I did a lot of internal work. I made a lot of amends daily just by showing up and keeping my word and showing up when I said I was going to show up, but it took a long time.
Yeah.
There was a lot of damage there. There was a lot of, infidelity and stealing. Like, our house was paid off. Our house was paid off when we were like 25. And then, well, he was older. He's always older. But when I was 25, the house was paid off. And now, he had to get a second mortgage because it all went to drugs and just, a lot of damage. But
So you mentioned a couple of things. You said you had to do a lot of internal work and you had to make a lot of amends. Let's talk about that first one. When you say you had to do a lot of internal work, what exactly does that look like?
well, for me, it was, I take part in a 12-step fellowship. So for me, it was step work. It was writing. And I did all the things that are suggested. I have a sponsor. I had a service position. I went to meetings, and I did a lot of writing. Step 4 is an inventory, your moral inventory, and it's all the things that you've done. And I had to take an honest look at some of the damage I really did to him, because it was way greater than I thought. And a lot of it was, he felt like on the flip side of it, he felt like I didn't want him. But really, I just had, the obsession and compulsion to keep using. It had nothing to do with him at all. Neither did the infidelity. The infidelity was based on, he doesn't want me to do drugs, but this guy will be okay with it. Yeah. You know what I mean? It wasn't necessarily based on anything to do with our marriage. So,
So explain it in ways like, so if there's somebody out there that's listening that is still in their addiction, they don't know much about the 12 steps. They don't know much about internal work. Like what explain it as if you were telling somebody who didn't know any of that stuff. Like what are some of the things that you find in the steps that made you kind of have to do some of that self-reflection? Like what did that look like?
I think first and foremost, accountability, like just being rigorously honest, as the other fellowship says, but like just really taking a look at my actions and not coming from it from a victim stance or a shameful stance, just like observing. I had to really step back and observe the things that I had done and really, take accountability for them. I think accountability is the biggest piece, because otherwise you're just saying you're sorry. You're not like, this is what I did, and then whatever. But for me, it was accountability. And, regardless of what you choose to do for internal work, I went to therapy when I had 4 years clean. Like, I did 4 years of therapy on top of step work and working a program. And so whatever that looks like, you have to have outside accountability, people around you that are going to say, hey, you're being a douche. And sorry, that's my word. And then internal accountability, like not just brushing stuff off, or it wasn't that bad, like really keeping track of the way that, I act out now. Was that simplified enough?
Yeah, that's great. So let's kind of shift more into, now you work in recovery, and you've worked at several different places, and you've been super involved in helping other people find these experiences that you've had for yourself. Let's talk about that a little bit. Like what are, if you had to say just off the top of your head without doing much thinking, what are some of the most important things you feel like you've learned about addiction and recovery from working in the addiction and recovery field? Like, what are some of the main ones?
Well, first of all, I would tell everybody to really take time before you work in treatment. You know, because what happened, like what I've seen is that people work in treatment and then they don't work on themselves. And then then it gets weird. Like people sleep with clients, or, you know, they have dual relationships, or it just gets messy, you know? And if you don't take care of yourself, you're screwed. You're screwed. I think I had a year clean when I started working for drug court, and it was wild internally. It was a lot. It was a lot to shoulder, because I didn't know how to set boundaries, or, you know, put the job down when I got home. I spent a lot of time on the phone for the first 7 years of my recovery, and I wasn't even doing admissions. You know, it was just outside stuff. So,
Yeah, I remember when I first started working in treatment, the best advice that I got was working in treatment is not your recovery.
Yeah.
And so I remember, even though I was working in treatment, I did the same exact things as when I was not working in treatment. You know, I still went to the same meetings, I still talked to my sponsor. And I think that is super important, because people get in and they're like, okay, well, I'm talking about drugs and alcohol all day, and I'm talking to people in recovery all day, and it's basically the same thing, and it's not at all.
No.
It's like two different worlds. And when I go to meetings, I don't want to talk about treatment. I don't want to talk about my job. I don't want to, you know, talk about clients, nothing. I'm there for me and going to meetings. So
it's like 7 years of boundaries. Seriously, everywhere I go, like there'd be, you know, clients would be there and they'd be like, hey, can you talk to me about my community service? And I'm like, hey, I'm here for me, you know? And so it took a long time to set those boundaries and to really, you know, consistently uphold them.
So what are some of the other challenges? You mentioned it, you know, boundaries being one of them. What are some other challenges that you as a person in recovery experience working in a field where you're helping other people try to find recovery?
Well, I think just acknowledging codependency. Like, I didn't realize how codependent I was until I wasn't okay when all my clients weren't okay, you know, or when somebody would die. And it's just, I didn't realize that's what was happening until I wrote, you know, I did some writing about it. But really, like, just everybody's life was my responsibility in my mind, which is not accurate and sounds stupid now. But that is probably one of the biggest things. And that, and just, you know, losing people. I can't even tell you the number of clients or friends in recovery that have died since I started working in the field.
Yeah. So we all work at Hope Rising now, which is a drug and alcohol rehab center. And so I want to let's separate it into three different areas, I guess. So, what happens, like things people do before they get into rehab, what happens when they're in rehab, and then things they need to do after rehab. Let's start at the beginning. For people who have not yet ever been to rehab, or people that are, maybe they've been a time or two, but they need to get back in or something. What are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the mistakes? What are suggestions? Like, give us some wisdom for people that probably need to go to rehab, but there's just roadblocks, whatever it is.
Well, I would buy cigarettes before you go. We know that's a big one. But I would say just go when you're planning to. Like, because it's, you know, whatever they call it, the lineal window where people are willing to go. It's so much harder to go after that period. You guys know. You guys sit around and wait
while the iron's hot.
Yeah, they have to go. Like, just go. And I think too, just really, that's it. You know, show up with some willingness. It doesn't matter. Like, the outside stuff can get handled. I think people you guys know, like, my dog's got to go somewhere, or, you know, can my husband come in with me or whatever. But like, really, they just need to go. Like, we'll help you figure out clothes, cigarettes, whatever. Just go.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest reasons that you see that prevent people from going to rehab?
Significant other still using. I would say that. We've heard dogs a lot, like there's nowhere for their dogs to go, or their cats, or I don't know, I'm sure we've had like lemurs or something. I don't know. I don't know where to take my
Lizards.
Lizards. But was there birds? There was birds one time. But I think it's usually significant others, or they always have something to do. Like people always have some major thing they need to do. Like they got to clean out their apartment.
Or their storage unit.
Oh, it's
Or
a storage unit.
Yep. I don't know how many storage units I've been to since working in treatment. More than I went to when I was using.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe.
But yeah.
Did you ever live in a storage unit?
No, I've never lived in a storage unit. I have, however, used in a storage unit. Used drugs.
Yes.
That'll be a story for another day. Okay, so what about while they're in rehab? And you in your position. So Jen is she's a case manager in charge of all the case managers at all of our locations that we have. You have lots and lots of years of case management with drug court and with, rehab centers and whatnot. And so while clients are in rehab, what are the biggest struggles that you see clients struggle with?
Cigarettes.
Besides that.
Oh, sorry. I've got a one-track mind today with that. I would say courts, like legal issues, which is, easily handled. Most people are like stoked that they're in treatment. Like, so good for you. I try to do like, what is it? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like food, shelter, and then the rest goes underneath it. Mm-hmm. Because if people are hungry and they don't have anywhere safe to stay, they're not going to stay clean. Like that's just my experience with it. So a lot of it's just, trying to figure out if they're going to have money for food. If not, get them on assistance, housing, like sober living, safe housing, and then, the legal issues. For the most part, that's like the biggest ones. I mean, and obviously we have, like I've driven somebody to get their car out of impound one time. I went to the storage unit. That was wild. Just things like that. The basic human stuff is what we take care of so that the clinical staff can deal with the internal stuff, the issues. Yeah. So they're not getting hounded for that.
Yeah. We'll have to bring one of our therapists on sometime to talk about like the clinical blocks or struggles that people have or whatever. But, okay, last one. After rehab or like when people complete residential and they get back into the outpatient level, what suggestions do you have or struggles, road bumps do you see? Like what wisdom do you have for people there?
I think that's like such a crucial time when people leave a residential facility where they're there the full time. So when they get out, they really need to start creating a support system, whatever that looks like for them, and just get in the middle. Whatever that looks like, because not everybody's path's going to be the same, but it's really hard to tell your husband, kid, whatever, I felt like using today. That's why you talk to someone that understands, be that your group or whatever. But, I'm a firm believer in, if the body goes, the rest will follow. So like just show up to outpatient, show up to meetings, show up, because eventually you're going to feel better. But people drop off in that period of time just because they, life is lifey when you get out of treatment. Somebody's like, why do you have to go to all those meetings? Why do you have to go to outpatient treatment? There's a lot of external pressure and internal pressure, I think, too. So just find some people and try to have a good time. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be so serious. I would not have stayed in recovery if I didn't laugh at everything.
Oh, absolutely. I remember I went to a treatment center and it was like, all work, no play, and it was like the most miserable 4 months of my life. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, if this is what recovery is, I don't want anything to do with it. Like, even when I was using and didn't want to use, I would laugh sometimes, but that just wasn't the case when it was just like book work and, I don't know, it was just miserable. And so I think that that's really important. And I think that people get out, and I think that one of the biggest roadblocks is, well, I got to get back to work, or I got to start working. It's like always just work. Even though they haven't worked for 13 years, they're like, well, now I got to start this job and start getting my life together. And I'm a vegan now. Like they always got to be like super healthy for some reason, but they've been using, toilet water to mix their shots up. Yeah. That they're like, okay, I got to work. I got to get healthy. And it's like all of this at once. And I think it can be really overwhelming at first.
Yeah. I think that's the black and white thinking for sure. Like I've got to do this, and like you got to get out to see your kids you haven't seen in 8 years, Yeah. It's pretty typical.
Yeah. It's like your kid's in college now. He doesn't want to see you.
I was one of those people, so I'm not, making fun of. I told the judge, I was like, I got to get out and be a parent. And he's like, are you being a parent now? And I was like, well, no, you won't let me out, like, so yeah, I get that too. Especially at the gym, Oh
yeah. Softball,
the gym or whatever. And that's fine if stuff supplements that, but like, you're not going to learn how to live at the gym. Which is why I don't go, because I know how to live.
That's right. You tell me.
You tell me. I have some more questions. I don't want to. If you have questions, just jump in.
No, I feel like I keep wanting to jump in on what she's saying.
Go for it.
Rude.
So we're picking Jen's brain today, but you jump in whenever. You're maybe one level not as smart as Jen.
Okay.
Jen's a little bit smarter than you.
She has more time than me.
I've
Yes.
got more years too
Yeah.
on my body.
There you go. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit. Let's talk about this. So what about let's talk about society and culture and stereotypes and stigmas and let's talk about that for a minute. Have you in the 10 years that you've gotten clean and been working with other people that struggle with addiction, how have you seen some of that change? What are kind of some of the big things? I know you're pretty involved in harm reduction type stuff. Tell us about that. And you can hammer down on any specific thing that you want to.
Okay. Well,
What fires you up?
harm reduction. But my first experience with it was back in the day when you had a warrant on bookings, on the bookings page, they had your picture and it'd be wanted across your face. And I had that because I was wanted.
They had a page just for warrants?
Yeah, they had a page just for
Not even people that were booked, just people that had warrants.
people that had big warrants, right? So, and I had a 50,000 cash only warrant because, I was
You
just,
did?
Yeah.
Dang, you're a bad person.
Hardcore. And so I got picked up on that warrant in Salt Lake County, and then they transported me down. So when I got out of jail, obviously the warrant had been recalled. I'd, done a specific time in jail. Well, they just left the picture up, but it said captured across my face. And I went to the Home Depot. We're not sponsored by Home Depot. And this guy he's like, I know you from somewhere. Where do I know you from? Are you in my ward? And I was like, no. And he's like, did you go to school with so-and-so? I'm like, no. And then I finally just told him, I'm like, I've been on the bookings page for a year. Captured. If you picture me with this on my face. And he's like, oh, yeah, that's where I know you from. And I was like, cool, can we go now?
Do you have a copy of that?
Probably somewhere. Actually, I think I screenshotted it somewhere, but
Yeah, you should send it to us.
I will. Absolutely. I have my thing in my purse. One of these times we can just show that, my ID.
Show-
But yeah,
Home Depot should sponsor this podcast because Home Depot probably supports a lot of addicts out there. A lot
I
of
think
their
they do hire
habits.
felons.
I think they do hire them. But
No,
yeah.
I mean because they're stealing their drills and pawning them.
Oh, shoot. There goes our sponsorship in one sentence.
Home
But yeah,
Depot,
so
call us.
I think, since I've been clean, I've got to experience a lot of that, just from the other side, because I worked with law enforcement so much, especially early on in my job. And, I had been on probation and I dealt with probation. And I think it was really hard for them to shift from me being an offender to me being a colleague
You mean it was hard for the law enforcement
yeah.
guys?
Yeah. And I'm not saying that's true of everyone, but there was a lot of, even with drug court, one of the deputies, there was a lot of conversation, and it was cool because I got to do that through that. I just got to be like, what do you think of me? Look at me now. Do you think that I was just as bad as this person or whatever? And so it kind of humanized it. But even in our county, I think people think that there's not a problem here. They didn't want us to give out Narcan until when it was legal in 2016. They were like, that's a needle. We'd ever use that giant gauge needle to inject drugs. It's crazy. So there's been a lot of growth that way. But I still think that in general, it's a marginalized population. We're stigmatized for being weak or having something wrong with us or whatever, long into.
Why can't they just stop?
Yeah, well, yeah, and they always tell some story I drank twice and I stopped on my own. Why can't you?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of stigma still.
I have a problem with Mountain Dew.
Oh my gosh, Diet Coke. I heard that one time somewhere in a meeting in the jail.
Yeah. But keep going on some of the stigmas and what are, you've kind of mentioned some of the bad ones and the, ways that people look at drug addicts, with certain judgments or whatnot. What do we do to change that? How do we fix that?
Well, I think the process has been happening for a long time. This is considered a mental illness or a health crisis versus these are just morally bad people, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of helped. And then I think too, just the way that people that are, actively in recovery act says a lot. we volunteer, we clean up after ourselves. Like just the way we present ourselves is different. And I was telling my husband the other day, I said, I wish everyone did as much internal looking that we do, because I'm always trying to be kinder and whatever. So I think that has just kind of spread throughout the community. And, we have Recovery Day. I think that helps. I think that different podcasts have helped. I think that everyone now, has a cousin, uncle, sister, child that has suffered from it. And so I think people are softening to the notion that, this isn't a moral failing, this is a disease.
Yeah.
So at least that's been my experience with it.
Yeah. So go into more specifics about harm reduction, and like maybe start with, what's your definition? How do you explain harm reduction? What is it, and why is it important? How does it help? What's the philosophy behind it? Tell us all about it.
Okay. So I would think that, and this is, just a short version of what harm reduction is. Harm reduction is a modality of treatment and society stuff that is, the idea is for people to lead a safer life, whatever that looks like for them. So I participated in a syringe exchange program when I started at Hope Rising. I was doing that on the side. So that is like a needle exchange, as well as rapid hepatitis C testing, HIV testing, and then case management, which is the most important part, linking them to treatment if they want to. And I had the 5 participants I had all went to treatment at some point because they had access to it. And people are eight times more likely to enter treatment if they're participating in a syringe exchange program.
So here's the obvious question that always gets asked. Why would you give drug addicts clean needles?
Well, as far as like, I can't think of the word, but communicable disease standpoint, if you stop sharing needles, you're stopping the spread of these diseases, which are prevalent in this area. So if you do a needle exchange, number one, they're not going in the garbage. They're being disposed of properly. Number two, they're using one single syringe at a time, which also it reduces your chance of getting myocarditis, where it attacks the valve in your heart. Mm-hmm. So that decreases. And then if you do have hepatitis C and you're getting treated for it, you can be cured of it, and then you won't give it to somebody else. So from a broader standpoint, it saves the government a lot of money because they're not having to treat people for these things. They're not having to dispose of things because the syringe exchange program is doing it. So a lot of it is that component. But the human component of it is just loving somebody where they're at. Do you want to get treatment? Do you want to get insurance? Do you want to be treated for this? You've tested positive for this. How can we link you to care?
I think people are so much more receptive to that approach than, I think that too often people look at drug addicts and addiction and they think like, okay, they're doing all this bad stuff. They're injecting their drugs. They're spreading diseases. They're breaking the laws. They're getting arrested. They're stealing stuff, all this stuff. We need to stop everything. And they want to throw them in jail, and they want to lock them up. And, is that going to stop all that stuff? Yes. You put them in a jail cell. They're not going to be doing that stuff anymore, right? But they get out. And if they don't have any sort of like, connections or knowledge about like how to change, all they know is they're going to go right back to that,
And it costs so much money. It costs more money to house people in a prison or a jail than it does to, give them some clean syringes and link to care.
And harm reduction is, instead of like taking that person, yanking them out of all their bad behaviors and locking them up in a jail cell, it's more so like, okay, if this is the very worst that this person is doing, let's start helping them do this much better.
Absolutely.
And then this much better.
Right.
And loving them along that pattern to kind of bring them down harm reduction for themselves and for the community. And I think that harm reduction as a whole is something that, like, I don't know, you take people that aren't really savvy about addiction and recovery and you say, hey, let's do a needle exchange. They're like, what?
Oh, yeah.
What kind of crazy person are you?
Yeah, you're enabling. Well, and also, I mean, what people don't pay attention if they don't like something, but you also have to provide naloxone or Narcan. So people are saving each other's lives. People who use drugs will always save each other's lives more than the outside society will. Yeah. And dead people don't recover. You've heard me say that 100 times. And it's just linkage to MAT. And all these things, some places do wound care. And then that way, like the cost goes down for the hospital because they're not doing ER visits for everything all the time. So there's so many positives to it that I don't think a lot of people talk about. But more importantly, like as a human being, I love people who use drugs. This is my population of people, whether they're in recovery or not, and just showing up for them and, getting them insurance so they can go get, wound care or an abscess taken care of or whatever. Like, let's start looking at us like we're human beings again. These are human beings.
Yeah.
These aren't, they're not all terrible people. Some people have done terrible things, sure, but these are human beings who need help. And people just want to shun them because they're doing something they don't agree with. And that's unfortunate. Even with like the crack pipes, like in Florida, remember that was a big thing. They were like, oh, they're passing out crack pipes. It's disease control.
There's probably thousands of people that we've helped along this whole way because we worked with each other for years. And I would say 99 out of 100 of them were just the most fantastic people that you've ever met, that you would have no problem inviting to Thanksgiving dinner with you, and I just think that, like you said, people want to shun them or us. And I think that if given the chance to meet them, especially in a sober state, they would change their whole stance. And I know, like, for the needle exchanges, I didn't have access to that when I was IV using, but it didn't stop me from reusing the same needles over and over again and sharing needles. And, like the needles would get just dull and I would have abscesses and I had to have surgeries on my arm because I kept using the same dirty needles over and over again. And so to think that handing out clean needles is going to enable, rather than if you did not hand out clean needles, like that would stop them. Nothing's going to stop an addict from using, like absolutely nothing until they're ready to change.
Well, and if there was somebody that was like giving you clean needles and like, if the time ever came like where you were like, gosh, like I'm so sick of living like this.
Yeah.
You'd probably call that person above, like you're not going to call the cops on yourself. You're not going to call, this person, that person. You're going to be like, hey, I'm going to call this person because they're actually helping me and they care about me. And I'm going to see what they know and if they have any connections to get me in,
Oh, for sure. I was doing it for 6 months and all of my participants went to treatment.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, if you're using just over and over and you've been doing it for years, you don't want to be doing it anymore. No. There comes a point where it's not fun and it's just miserable and you want to get help.
Against your will at some point.
Yeah.
Well, Jen, we could go on and on and on. We'll probably have to have you back on. We'll have to continue this conversation. But sum it all up for us. What advice do you have? What closing suggestions or remarks or advice do you have for the listeners out there?
Which listeners? The ones who are using?
Anybody that might see this.
Just it.
From Kemmerer to Florida.
Kemmerer to crack pipe. I would just say that, like, that addicts are human beings. We're human beings. I just view us as human beings. Because I think that's like the hardest part. And I know I've talked to you guys about that before, but when that guy was, passed out or unresponsive in the Smith's parking lot right by the door, people stepped over him like he wasn't a human being. And that has forever changed my life as far as how I view it and how, I view other people. Like, we're human beings. We deserve a chance. We deserve to live. We deserve to have, however many chances it takes to get better. We wouldn't turn anybody else away if they didn't get their diabetes under control or their cancer came back from remission. And I'm not comparing it to cancer for the sake of that, but just let us be human beings,
You're just with compassion.
Yeah.
Well, we want to help you. I'm willing to bet that everybody out there, whoever might see this, everybody knows somebody that struggles with addiction. We want to help you help that person. So whether they end up coming to Hope Rising or not, we don't care, but we want to help you find a place for them. Feel free to call us, DM us, go to our website, whatever we can do to help. We'll leave it at that.